Alistair Ashford raised his champagne glass toward the golden banner that hung above the stage. Founder of the year. His name. His moment. The cameras flashed as Genevieve pressed herself against his side, her diamond necklace catching the light like a trophy. Then he saw her. Tasha Banks stood in the VIP circle, 20 feet from the stage, not hiding in the shadows, not crying at home. She was wearing black silk that moved like smoke, her curls framing a face he had tried to erase from every photograph, every patent, every memory. And she wasn't alone. Sterling Vance had his hand on the small of her back. The Sterling Vance, billionaire, industry titan, the man whose signature could make or destroy empires. He was leaning down to whisper something in Tasha's ear, and she was smiling. Not the small, apologetic smile Alistair remembered. This smile was sharp, knowing. The champagne turned sour in Alistair's mouth. Someone in the crowd whispered. Then another. Heads turned. The investors who had just applauded Alistair's genius were now staring at the woman he had spent 3 years pretending didn't exist. Genevieve's hand tightened on his arm. Alistair, that's her. Her voice dropped to an urgent whisper. That's your ex-wife. What is she doing here? He couldn't answer, because Sterling Vance was walking toward the stage now, pulling Tasha with him, and in her hands, glowing blue against the dim ballroom, was a tablet. On its screen, lines of code scrolled past, code that looked familiar, code that should have been buried. The applause died. Sterling's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry to interrupt this celebration. His smile didn't reach his eyes. But I think there's been a mistake about who actually built Ashford Dynamics. The room held its breath. Tasha stepped forward into the light, and Alistair's perfect world began to crack. If you love watching someone finally get the credit they deserve, hit like and subscribe. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from as the truth comes out? 3 years earlier, Tasha's fingers flew across the keyboard at 2:47 a.m. The apartment was silent except for the hum of her laptop and Alistair's soft snoring from the bedroom. She had been coding for 6 hours straight, surviving on cold coffee and the electric thrill of watching something impossible become real. The algorithm was finally working. She leaned back, staring at the screen as lines of code cascaded into a pattern that would revolutionize data encryption. This wasn't just good. This was the foundation of something that could change entire industries. Her chest tightened with the kind of pride that came from creating something from nothing. Tasha? Alistair's voice drifted from the hallway. He shuffled out in his pajamas, squinting against the light. You're still up? I finished it. She turned the laptop toward him, unable to keep the excitement from her voice. The core algorithm. It's running at twice the speed we projected, and the security protocols are untouchable. He blinked at the screen, then at her. That's incredible, babe. He kissed the top of her head, but his eyes were already glazing over. He'd never understood the technical side. That had always been her domain. We should file the patent tomorrow, she said. Get the documentation in order before. We will, he yawned, squeezing her shoulder. But not tomorrow. I have that investor lunch, remember? The one with the venture capital guys. This is perfect timing. I can tell them we've made the breakthrough. Something flickered in her chest. Not quite worry. Not yet. Should I come? I can explain the technical specs. No need. His smile was easy, confident. You know how those guys are. They want the vision, not the code. But don't worry. He cupped her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. We're a team, Tash. Your work is my work. When I succeed, we both succeed. She wanted to believe him. She had always believed him. Go to bed, he said, already turning back toward the bedroom. You've earned it. Tasha stayed at the desk, staring at the screen. Her algorithm, her breakthrough. The thing she'd sacrificed sleep and sanity to build. She saved the file under both their names, the way she always did. Partnership, she told herself. That's what marriage meant. But as she finally closed the laptop, something cold settled in her stomach. A whisper she didn't want to hear. She ignored it. She went to bed believing they were a team, that her name would matter, that the hours she poured into the darkness would be remembered when the lights finally came on. She didn't know yet that Alistair had already decided whose name deserved to be in the spotlight. And it wasn't hers. Tasha sat in the back corner of the conference room, her notebook balanced on her knee. She'd expected to present alongside Alistair. She'd rehearsed the technical breakdown, prepared slides showing the algorithm's architecture, even practiced answering questions about scalability. But when the investors filed in, Alistair had touched her arm and whispered, "Let me handle the pitch. You know how they are with technical jargon. I'll keep it high level." So she sat and she watched. Alistair stood at the head of the table, his smile easy and practiced. The presentation glowed on the screen behind him, each slide showing her code, her breakthrough, her months of sleepless nights. But only his name appeared in the corner. Sole inventor. "Gentlemen," Alistair began, his voice smooth as silk, "what you're looking at is a complete revolution in data encryption. I've developed an algorithm that processes at twice the industry standard while maintaining military-grade security." Tasha's pen froze against the paper. He clicked to the next slide. Her architecture diagram filled the screen, the one she'd drawn at 3 in the morning, mapping out the logic that made the whole system work. Alistair gestured to it like he was unveiling a masterpiece. "The elegance of this design," he continued, "is in its simplicity. I realized that by restructuring the core protocols, we could achieve speeds no one thought possible. I realized, I developed, I designed." Every sentence was a small erasure. One of the investors leaned forward. "This is impressive, Ashford. How long did it take you to build this?" Alistair's eyes flicked to Tasha for half a second. Then his smile widened. 8 months of intensive solo development. Late nights, early mornings. But when you're building something this transformative, you don't count the hours. Solo development. The words hit her like a fist to the stomach. She wanted to stand up, to interrupt, to say, "Actually, I built this. Every line of code, every protocol, every breakthrough you're celebrating, that was me." But her voice caught in her throat. Because Alistair wasn't lying with malice. He was lying with confidence. The kind of confidence that came from believing he deserved the credit simply because he was the one in front of the room, because he was the one they wanted to listen to. Another investor nodded approvingly. "You're a hell of an innovator, Ashford. This is exactly the kind of vision we look for in a founder." Founder. Singular. Tasha's hands clenched around her notebook. The investors were shaking Alistair's hand now, clapping him on the shoulder, talking about valuations and term sheets. No one looked at her. No one asked if she'd contributed. She was furniture, background noise, the wife who sat quietly while her husband collected applause for her genius. When the meeting ended, Alistair walked over, his face glowing with triumph. "Did you see their faces? They're going to fund us, Tash. This is it. We're going to be huge." The word tasted like ash. "You didn't mention me," she said quietly. He blinked, surprised. "What? You said solo development. You said you built it." His expression shifted just slightly. Impatience, maybe, or annoyance. "Tasha, come on. They're investing in me, in my leadership. They don't need to know every detail of the process." "It's not a detail. It's my work. Our work," he corrected, but his tone had an edge now. "And I'm the one putting our names on the map." He kissed her forehead and walked away, already dialing his phone to share the good news. Tasha stood alone in the empty conference room, staring at the screen where her algorithm still glowed, and she realized something cold and certain. This was only the beginning. Tasha found the photo on TechCrunch. Visionary founder Alistair Ashford closes $15 Series B. There he was, center frame at some exclusive industry mixer, his arm around a blonde woman in a white cocktail dress. Genevieve Laurent, according to the caption, VP of marketing at a European luxury brand, the kind of woman who looked like she belonged on magazine covers, the kind of woman Tasha had never been. She stared at the image on her laptop screen, sitting in the small office that had once been theirs, but now felt like hers alone. Alistair barely came home anymore. Board meetings, investor dinners, networking events she was no longer invited to. "You wouldn't enjoy it," he'd said the last time she asked. "It's all surface-level conversation, small talk. You hate that stuff." He wasn't wrong, but he'd stopped asking. The door opened. Alistair walked in, already loosening his tie, his phone pressed to his ear. He glanced at her, held up one finger. "Wait." She waited. "Absolutely," he said into the phone, his voice bright with the charm he saved for important people. Genevieve's been incredible with the rebrand. She gets the vision. She knows how to sell the story. He paused, laughing at something Tasha couldn't hear. Yeah, she's exactly what we needed. We. That word again. But it didn't mean the same thing anymore. He ended the call and finally looked at her. Hey, you're still up. Who's Genevieve? His expression didn't change, didn't even flicker. She's heading our new marketing division. Why? I saw the photo from the Vanguard event. Oh, he shrugged, setting his phone down. Yeah, she's been helping me network with the European investors. She's got connections we need. You didn't tell me you hired someone. Tash, I hire people all the time. You want me to run every personnel decision by you? His tone was patient, but there was something underneath it. Exhaustion, or maybe irritation. You're busy with development. I handle operations. That's how we divided things, remember? She hadn't remembered agreeing to that division. But maybe she had. Maybe it had happened so gradually she hadn't noticed the line being drawn. She's very pretty, Tasha said quietly. Alistair paused, then crossed the room to her. He cupped her face, the gesture almost tender. Almost. You're being paranoid. Genevieve is a colleague, a professional asset. That's it. But Tasha saw it in his eyes. The way he looked at her now compared to how he used to, like she was a problem to be managed instead of a partner to be celebrated. The board wants me to do more press, he continued, pulling away. Build the personal brand. Genevieve thinks we should position me as the face of the company. The singular vision behind the technology. Singular, Tasha repeated. You know what I mean. One clear voice. It's better for the narrative. The narrative, not the truth. The story he wanted to tell. He kissed her forehead, the same dismissive gesture he'd been using for months. Get some sleep. You look exhausted. She watched him walk toward the bedroom, watched him check his phone one more time, smiling at whatever message lit up the screen. And she understood something that made her chest ache. She wasn't being replaced because she'd failed. She was being replaced because she'd succeeded too quietly. Because brilliance without beauty, genius without glamour, didn't photograph well in press releases. Alistair needed a partner who looked like success. And Tasha had never been that. The divorce lawyer's office smelled like leather and old money. Tasha sat across from Alistair and his legal team, 3 men in suits who looked at her like she was wasting their time. Let's make this simple, Alistair said, his voice flat. No warmth, no history. He might as well have been negotiating with a stranger. You walk away clean, no drama, no claims. Genevieve sat beside him, her hand resting on his arm. She'd upgraded from colleague to fiancée in 6 months. The ring on her finger was bigger than anything Alistair had ever given Tasha. I want equity, Tasha said quietly. I helped build that company, the algorithm. The algorithm that's listed under my patent? Alistair's lawyer interrupted, sliding a document across the table. The one registered solely in Mr. Ashford's name? The intellectual property that legally belongs to Ashford Dynamics, of which Mr. Ashford is the sole founder. Sole founder. The words were surgical, precise, designed to cut. Tasha's lawyer touched her arm, a warning. They'd been over this. She had no documentation, no proof, no emails explicitly claiming credit. She'd been too trusting, too naive, too busy building instead of protecting herself. Alistair leaned back in his chair, almost bored. Tasha, be realistic. The company's worth nothing right now. We're burning cash. The Series C funding fell through. If we're lucky, we'll break even in 3 years. Then why do you care if I want a share of nothing? His smile was thin, condescending. Because I'm trying to be generous. I'm offering you $200,000, cash, today. You can start over, do your own thing. He paused. You were always more comfortable in the background anyway. Genevieve's perfectly manicured fingers tightened on his sleeve, a show of support, of unity, everything Tasha used to be. Take the money, Alistair's lawyer said, or we go to court, and you get nothing, your choice. Tasha stared at the settlement agreement, $200,000 for 4 years of her life. For every late night, every breakthrough, every piece of genius she'd handed to a man who'd rewritten history with her erased from it. Her lawyer leaned close. Tasha, you won't win this. The patents are in his name. You have no case. She picked up the pen. Alistair relaxed, satisfied. He thought she was broken, thought she was giving up. He didn't notice her lawyer's pen moving across the fine print on page 17. didn't see the amendment being added to Section 12, subsection C, a single clause buried in legal jargon, barely visible. In the event of Series C funding exceeding $20 million, original intellectual contributors shall retain 18% equity stake activated upon investment closure. She signed her name, slowly, carefully. Smart choice, Alistair said, standing. He didn't offer his hand, didn't say goodbye, just walked out with Genevieve on his arm, already talking about wedding venues. Tasha sat in the empty conference room, staring at her signature on the document. She looked defeated. She looked destroyed. She looked exactly how she needed to look. Because Alistair had forgotten something important. He'd taught her to code, to build systems, to hide things in plain sight where arrogant men would never think to look. She'd just embedded her insurance policy in his future. And when the money came, when the company he'd stolen finally became worth billions, she'd be there to collect what was always hers. 2 years after the divorce, Tasha Banks stopped explaining herself. She took consulting contracts, small firms that needed encryption architecture, startups building security platforms. She worked quietly, brilliantly, and always under NDAs that protected her innovations. She built a reputation in the shadows, the kind of reputation that traveled through whispered recommendations among people who actually understood the technology. She didn't chase press, didn't network at galas, didn't try to reclaim her name from Alistair's carefully constructed narrative. She waited, and she built a network of people who knew the truth. Sterling Vance found her at a cybersecurity conference in Berlin. She was sitting in the back row of a technical panel, scribbling notes, when he slid into the seat beside her. "You're Tasha Banks," he said. Not a question. She looked up, recognized him immediately. Everyone in the industry knew Sterling Vance. Self-made billionaire, founder of 3 successful tech companies, the man who could make or break careers with a single investment. "And you're Sterling Vance," she replied evenly. "I've been looking for you." He handed her his tablet. On the screen was a forensic analysis of Ashford Dynamics' core encryption algorithm. Layers of code, broken down and time-stamped. "I'm considering an investment in Ashford's company, but something didn't add up." Tasha's chest tightened. She knew what he'd found. "The architecture is too sophisticated for someone with Ashford's technical background," Sterling continued. "So I dug deeper, found some very interesting metadata on the original development files, digital signatures that don't match his, timestamps that predate his patent filings." He paused, watching her. "Your signatures, Miss Banks." She said nothing. "Then I pulled the divorce settlement." His eyes were sharp, calculating. "Most people wouldn't notice, but I built my career on reading the fine print. Section 12, subsection C. Very clever." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "What do you want?" "What do you want?" he countered. "Because from where I'm sitting, Alistair Ashford is about to close a $200 million Series C funding round, which means your little clause is about to activate. And unless I'm mistaken, 18% of $200 million is a very uncomfortable surprise for a man who thinks he owns everything." Tasha met his gaze. "He erased me. From every patent, every article, every press release, he built an empire on my work and made me disappear." "I know." Sterling's voice was cold with fury. "I've spent the last 3 months verifying every detail. Your algorithm powers 60% of his company's value. His so-called genius is your genius, and he's about to be named Founder of the Year for it." "The Genius Awards," Tasha murmured. "Next month." Sterling leaned back, a dangerous smile forming. "I'm the keynote investor, which means I have a stage, and I have proof." He turned the tablet toward her, showing pages of documentation, original code files, encrypted timestamps, email chains proving her authorship. "Question is, do you want to collect your equity quietly, or do you want the world to know who really built Ashford Dynamics?" Tasha thought of Alistair's face in that conference room, his casual erasure of her existence, the way he'd smiled when she signed the settlement, thinking she was broken. "I want my name back," she said. Sterling's smile sharpened. "Then let's make sure everyone remembers it." Alistair froze on stage, his champagne glass trembling in his hand. Tasha Banks was supposed to be invisible, irrelevant, a footnote he'd successfully erased from his story. But there she stood, 20 feet from him, wearing confidence like armor. He thrust his glass at Genevieve and strode off the stage, gesturing frantically at his head of security. "Get them out," he hissed, "now." The security chief hesitated, looking at Sterling Vance. "Sir, that's Sterling Vance. He's on the investor board. I don't care who he is. That woman is my ex-wife. She wasn't invited. She's trespassing." The security chief shifted uncomfortably. Around them, the ballroom had gone quiet, conversations dying, heads turning. The elite of Silicon Valley loved nothing more than watching someone's carefully constructed image shatter in real time. Sterling noticed the approaching security and smiled. Not warmly. It was the smile of a man who owned buildings, companies, futures. "Is there a problem, Ashford?" Alistair's jaw clenched. "You're disrupting a private event." "Private?" Sterling glanced around at the 300 guests, the press photographers, the live stream cameras. "Looks pretty public to me, and I was invited. Keynote investor, remember? I believe my firm wrote a rather substantial check that helped fund this little celebration." The words hit like a slap. The investors nearby shifted, murmuring. Money had a hierarchy, and Sterling Vance sat at the apex. Alistair's eyes cut to Tasha. She hadn't said a word, hadn't moved, just stood there, watching him with an expression he couldn't read. Not angry, not bitter. Something worse. Calm. Genevieve appeared at Alistair's elbow, her face pale. She'd last seen Tasha broken and defeated in that divorce lawyer's office. The transformation was startling. "She wasn't supposed to be here," Genevieve hissed. "Alistair, what is she doing with Sterling Vance?" "I'm attending an awards ceremony," Tasha said quietly, her voice carrying in the sudden silence. "For a company I helped build." The words landed in the silence like stones into still water, ripples spreading. Whispers starting. Sterling's hand remained on Tasha's back, a public claim, a statement. "Ms. Banks was actually instrumental in developing the core technology that won you this award tonight." He paused, letting the words settle. "Isn't that right, Ashford?" Alistair's face flushed. "I don't know what she's told you, but she hasn't told me anything." Sterling's voice cut through the crowd like a knife through silk. "The code told me everything." The murmurs grew louder. Investors exchanging glances. Board members pulling out phones. The press photographers moving closer, sensing blood in the water. Alistair looked around desperately. This was his night, his moment, his empire. But the crowd wasn't looking at him with admiration anymore. They were looking at him with doubt. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sterling said, his voice carrying across the ballroom, "if I could have everyone's attention for just a moment." He gestured toward the massive screens that had been displaying Alistair's accolades. "I have something very important to share about the true genius behind Ashford Dynamics." Alistair's world began to tilt, and Tasha Banks, the woman he'd erased, stepped forward into the light he'd stolen. The ballroom screens flickered. Alistair's promotional video vanished, replaced by lines of code. Raw, technical, beautiful in its complexity. Sterling's voice was ice. "This is the original encryption algorithm that powers Ashford Dynamics, the foundation of the entire company." He gestured to the screen. "Notice the timestamp in the corner, March 14th, 2:47 a.m. Tasha remembered that night. The cold coffee, the silent apartment, the moment everything clicked into place. Now look at the digital signature. Sterling zoomed in on the metadata. T. Banks. Not A. Ashford. T. Banks. The crowd leaned forward. Phones came out. Investors weren't whispering anymore. They were staring. Alistair's voice cracked. This is a fabrication. Anyone can fake metadata." "Can they?" Sterling swiped to the next screen. Email chains appeared. Dates, times, attachments. "Here's Miss Banks sending the completed algorithm to your company email. March 14th, 6:23 a.m., with a note that reads, 'Finish the core encryption. Review when you're up.'" Tasha watched Alistair's face drain of color. Sterling wasn't finished. "And here's the patent filing, under your name, sole inventor." He paused. "Filed March 18th, 4 days after Ms. Banks created it, 4 days after she sent it to you." The screen split. On one side, Tasha's original code. On the other, Alistair's patent application. Line by line, they were identical. Not similar, identical. "She wrote every line," Sterling said quietly. "Every protocol, every breakthrough you've been celebrated for. And you erased her name from existence." Alistair lunged forward. "She was my wife. We shared everything. It was our work." "Then why isn't her name on a single patent?" Sterling's voice cut like a scalpel. Why isn't she listed as a co-founder? Why did you tell investors you did this alone? The crowd shifted. Board members looked at each other. One of them pulled out a phone, already calling lawyers. Genevieve touched Alistair's arm, her face pale. Alistair, tell them this isn't true. He couldn't, because every screen in the room was showing the proof. Encrypted files, development logs, chat histories, years of documentation that Tasha had quietly kept, backed up, protected, the digital receipts of her genius. Sterling's final slide appeared. The divorce settlement. Section 12, subsection C, highlighted in red. Ms. Banks retained 18% equity in the event of Series C funding. You closed $200 million yesterday. He smiled, which makes her your largest minority shareholder. And according to the terms she embedded, she has the right to assume an executive partnership role. The room erupted, press cameras flashing, investors shouting questions, board members already on their phones with the legal team. Alistair stood frozen. His award sat on the podium behind him, suddenly meaningless. His empire, built on stolen brilliance, was collapsing in real time. Sterling turned to Tasha, extended his hand, not as an investor, as a partner. She took it and stepped onto the stage where her name had always belonged. Tasha stood on the stage, the lights burning bright after years in the shadows. The ballroom was chaos, investors shouting, press cameras flashing, board members huddled in urgent conversation. But she felt strangely calm. Sterling stepped closer, his presence commanding the attention of the entire room. Effective, immediately, Vance Capital is exercising Ms. Banks' equity clause and restructuring Ashford Dynamics' leadership. His voice carried over the noise. Tasha Banks will assume the role of Chief Technology Officer and co-founder with full executive authority. Co-founder, the word she'd been denied for years. Alistair's voice cracked from somewhere below the stage. You can't do this. I already have. Sterling pulled out a tablet displaying legal documents. Your Series C funding came through my firm, and when I discovered the intellectual fraud, I made certain adjustments to the terms. Ms. Banks' equity isn't just ownership, it's control. The board members were nodding now. Money spoke louder than ego, and Sterling Vance held the purse strings. Sterling turned to Tasha, his expression shifting from calculated investor to something warmer, something real. I've spent 3 months investigating your work, reading every line of code you wrote, understanding the brilliance they tried to bury. He took her hand. You didn't just build an algorithm, Tasha. You built the future. And I don't partner with frauds. He leaned down and kissed her. Not tentatively, not politely. He kissed her the way a billionaire claimed what he valued, in front of 300 witnesses, in front of cameras streaming to thousands, in front of Alistair Ashford and his carefully constructed lie. The ballroom erupted, not in scandal, but in validation, because Sterling Vance didn't make mistakes. If he was claiming Tasha Banks, she was worth claiming. When they broke apart, Tasha's heart was hammering, but her smile was steady. Sterling kept his arm around her waist, a public declaration. Tasha and I will be restructuring the company, together, as partners. He paused. In every sense. The message was clear. Tasha wasn't just reclaiming her legacy. She was stepping into a new empire with a man who saw her worth. Below the stage, Genevieve stood frozen, her diamond necklace suddenly looking cheap under the lights. She'd married Alistair for his success, for the image, for the empire. But the empire was built on sand, and it was crumbling beneath her designer heels. Alistair's face was ashen. Tasha, please, we can talk about this. No, her voice was soft but final. You had years to talk. You chose silence. You chose erasure. You chose her. She looked at Genevieve, whose perfect composure was cracking. Enjoy the man you won, Genevieve. The genius was always mine. Sterling's hand tightened on her waist. Protective, possessive, proud. The head of the awards committee approached, looking stricken. Mr. Ashford, in light of these revelations, we'll need to rescind. Keep the award, Tasha interrupted. She looked at Alistair one last time. Keep everything you stole, because I don't need a trophy to prove what I built. She turned, Sterling beside her, and walked off the stage. Behind her, Alistair's empire burned. Ahead of her, the spotlight finally shone on the right name. The next morning, Tasha Banks walked into the Ashford Dynamics headquarters for the first time in 3 years. Not through the side entrance, through the front doors. Security recognized her immediately. They didn't stop her. The lobby was chaos. Board members in emergency session, legal teams huddled in corners, employees whispering, phones out, reading the headlines that had erupted overnight. Tech founder exposed, genius wife built empire he claimed. Sterling Vance backs original innovator in fraud scandal. Tasha Banks, the woman erased from her own success. Sterling walked beside her, his hand at the small of her back. Not possessive, supportive. Ready? She nodded. The conference room fell silent when they entered. 12 board members sat around the table. Alistair stood at the head, dark circles under his eyes, his perfect image shattered. Genevieve sat beside him, her expression cold and calculating. The trophy wife realizing she'd bet on the wrong horse. "This is a private board meeting," Alistair said, but his voice had no strength. The board chairman cut him off. "Mr. Vance represents our largest investment. Miss Banks is now our CTO and co-founder. They have every right to be here." He turned to Alistair, his face hard. "You, however, are suspended pending investigation into intellectual property fraud." "Suspended," Alistair's voice cracked. "I built this company. You stole this company." The chairman slid a document across the table. "Every patent filed under your name is being reviewed. Every contract, every public statement. The SEC is involved. The press is circling. And our investors are demanding answers." Genevieve stood abruptly. "I need to speak with my lawyer." "Your husband's lawyer, you mean?" Sterling corrected smoothly. "Good luck with that. Most of them are about to be subpoenaed." She looked at Alistair, her perfect composure finally breaking. "You told me you built this. You told me." She grabbed her purse. "I'm filing for divorce." And just like that, she walked out. The woman who'd replaced Tasha was abandoning the sinking ship she'd helped create. Alistair sank into his chair, a man watching his empire collapse in real time. Tasha didn't feel satisfaction. She felt relief. The weight of years of erasure finally lifting. "Ms. Banks," the chairman said, "we'd like to formally apologize for the oversight and offer you full partnership status. Your name will be on every patent, every press release, the building if you want it." Sterling's hand found hers under the table. "I want my lab back," Tasha said quietly. "I want my team, and I want transparency moving forward. No more hiding genius behind image." The chairman nodded. "Done." They restructured the company in 3 hours. Alistair's shares diluted, his title revoked. His name would remain on the building only because removing it would cost more than it was worth. But everyone would know the truth now. Tasha Banks built Ashford Dynamics, and Alistair Ashford stole it. As they left the building, Sterling pulled her close. "How does it feel?" She looked up at the building that bore her ex-husband's name. Soon, very soon, it would bear hers too. "Like I can finally breathe," she said, and walked away from the shadows into the empire she'd always deserved. If you loved watching Tasha reclaim her legacy, hit like and subscribe. Drop a comment, where are you watching from? And tell me, have you ever had to fight to get credit for your own work?